together in this house. Come on, y'all know this one. In this house, in this house, it all comes together in this house of God.
In this house beats the heart of a family. In this house is the center of a community. We study and we pray, find meaning in each day. In this house, in this house, in this house. In this house is a spark of God's creation. In this house there is joy and celebration. By song or by word, your prayers will be heard. In this house, in this house, in this house. In this house, in this house, it all comes together in this house. In this house, in this house, it all comes together in this house of God. In this house we can shelter, we can clothe and feed. In this house there is always help for those in need. The stranger makes a friend, becomes inspired again. In this house, in this house, in this house. Here we go. In this house, in this house, it all comes together in this house. In this house, in this house, it all comes together in this house of God. You know what to do. A house of study, a house of prayer, a house of gathering, from everywhere.
Wasn't that a wonderful array of photos? When we first saw it, it brought tears to our eyes. Many thanks to Cheryl Kalis for providing the photos and capturing all the memories. Ajit and Sophia for putting it together for music. Just to let you know, everyone in the audience has been muted. We've also turned off the chat function for Dr. Walensky, at which time it will be enabled and you'll be able to type your question into the chat feature. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Donor 85, Connecting Wild Heart. I am Karen Dresner, and I am here with my co-chair and dear friend, Jane Marshall, who is standing safely away from me in Risman Hall. We are so excited to be really adhering to all the COVID-19 safeties and protocols and guidelines. So you might see us shiver a bit because the doors must be left open for the best airflow. It's also quite emotional for us because it's the first time we've been in the temple since March. But this year, we are virtual, like so many of the meetings and events and family gatherings we've all been attending. And like many of those events, there may be some glitches, so bear with us. You scroll through the Zoom screens to see all your friends from the temple community.
Hi, I'm Jane Marshall. As one of the co-chairs of this event, we are so incredibly thrilled to welcome you to Sisterhood's 85th annual donor event, Connecting All Heart, a virtual gathering. As many of you know, in donors of years past, we would have all had our hors d'oeuvres, sipped a glass of wine or a mimosa, and done quite a bit of holiday shopping, seeing our friends in the foyer at our fun and fabulous boutiques. We would have moved on to a beautiful table in an Atlas Hall with our close friends sharing the experience. But this year, we are separated from one another, coming together virtually, but united in the special essence of donor and sisterhood.
On a personal level, having grown up in Newton at Temple Emmanuel, having my bat mitzvah here, and having my mother attend these events year to year, it is so meaningful for me to be co-chairing donor and having a hand in putting together this very important and sustaining sisterhood event. Thinking back, I had the honor of co-chairing donor 4 years ago. Then, in 2016, we worried about tablecloths and flowers and, of course, the menu. But this year, it's all about multimedia, Zoom links, screen sharing, and all the logistics of putting together a digital event. But since we are virtual, I can now have family and friends from cities across the country still attend. Still, then and now, the goal was camaraderie, connecting and inspiring sisterhood women, whether in person or in Zoom. Even virtually, we are all here together watching the same program at the same time.
Although I didn't grow up in Newton like Karen, my connection to the Temple community runs equally deep. Having been a member for nearly 30 years, educating my kids here and marking so many life events and transitions. Speaking for so many of us, we all miss the Temple family dearly, but being part of the organizing force of donor and getting to know the other sisterhood members, as well as the Temple Emmanuel team, has helped to fill that gap.
We are delighted to say that we have over 250 people Zooming in today, and we've raised over $18,000. Your attendance and support is greatly appreciated. As they say, it takes a village to put this program together. Amy and I would like to acknowledge and thank the sisterhood members, the TE staff, and of course our clergy, who ensured that we would have a successful program today. We also want to acknowledge our donor hostesses, who, as many of you know, have always worked tirelessly year after year to connect with many of their friends to generate enthusiasm for donor. Many of these women helped us again this year to encourage attendance, and for that we are most appreciative. We are also very grateful for the corporate sponsors who immediately responded to our request for support during this most challenging time. We value their relationship and their long-standing commitment to sisterhood. And lastly, Jamie and I want to thank the participating boutiques, many of whom have been with us year after year. Please continue to support them and shop after the program.
We have an exciting program ahead of us, including tape performances from Zamira, our women's choir, as well as tape performances from the Temple Emmanuel Children's Choir, and our clergy coming to you directly from the sanctuary. We are incredibly thrilled and honored to have as our keynote speaker, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, a practicing infectious disease physician at MGH division. As Rochelle is on call this weekend, she is zooming in from her office at the hospital, and we are very grateful that she could carve out time for us. Dr. Walensky's primary research interests have focused on the cost effectiveness of HIV testing, care, and prevention strategies to inform AIDS public health policy, both in the US and worldwide. In regards to the current COVID-19 pandemic, as an infectious diseases specialist, Rochelle has been on the front lines over the past year in the development of public health policies and guidelines. She has helped local, national, and international leaders navigate their way through the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis, leading, for example, on universal masking policies and testing strategies. And for us today, most importantly, as a Temple member, Rochelle has played a pivotal role in advising us on our own COVID-19 response strategy and development of protocols. And I think that many of you will recognize Rochelle from her appearances on. Karen and I are very confident that you'll learn much and be inspired by our talk, and we hope you enjoy the entire program. We really have tried to honor and include as many of the donor traditions as possible, so they don't feel like you are sitting in Addison with your friends. We would now like to welcome Rabbi Gardenschwartz, who will be offering the invocation from the sanctuary.
Good morning again. So just as I was saying, there is, to that point, there's something weird and off and discombobulating about virtual donor. And in fact, virtual donor feels like an oxymoron. And I was just invoking the late comedian George Carlin's routine about oxymorons, jumbo shrimp, virtual donor. When you think about donor, and there's been donor events for 84 years, they've always been in the community hall. They've always had 300 plus people. We've always been sitting together at tables, eating and drinking and schmoozing and connecting and building. And so for this 85th, we're in this virtual world. How do we make sense of virtual donor? And what's the spiritual resonance and the emotional resonance of the first ever virtual donor? So I think the answer, as always, is found in our Torah reading. Yesterday, Abraham is kind of down. He's down because God has promised Abraham, I'm going to make you Goy Gadol. A whole nation is going to come from you. Abraham, you are going to have so many children. You can't even count them all. You're going to have so many descendants. They are literally innumerable. And God promises Abraham all those descendants, all those children, all those grandchildren, nachas machine. He promises that to Abraham when he's 75. Meanwhile, Abraham is now in his 90s. We don't know exactly how old. It says sometime thereafter. But he's in his 90s because we know that Abraham's first child, Ishmael, is born when Abraham is 99. And Isaac is born when Abraham is 100. So Abraham has to go through something like 24 years, 25 years, until God's promise that you're going to be the father of numerous multitudes is realized. And in the reading yesterday, Abraham is down and out and says to God, God, you know what? I am actually childless. I mean, you've been promising me many, many descendants. I don't have any. You've been promising many. I don't have any. I have zero. I am childless. Eliezer, my servant, is going to inherit me. And God says to Abraham, hey, come on outside and look outside, look at the stars in the heaven. And if you see those stars in the heaven, you cannot count them, you can't name them, you can't number them. I'm telling you, God says to Abraham, you are going to have descendants that are as numerous, more numerous than the stars in the heaven. And the text ends with Abraham saying, okay, that Abraham has faith in God and has faith in the future. I think about 85th donor, virtual donor, as the stars in the sky that gave Abraham his faith back. Today is November the 1st, which makes it the 9th month of the pandemic. This is the beginning of the 9th month. You remember when it began in March, all the talk was about virtual Pesach Seders. How are we ever going to do a virtual Seder? And roll the film forward and virtual high holidays. How are we ever going to do virtual high holidays? Roll the film forward, Thanksgiving. How are we going to do a virtual Thanksgiving? How are we going to do Thanksgiving inside with family and friends who always come together for Thanksgiving? How's that going to work? 9 months later, we're like Abraham. We're like, oh my God. But we need stars in the sky that restores our hope, and that is this morning. Because this morning is our sisterhood's way and our synagogue's way of saying that, you know what's even stronger than a pandemic? Our love for one another. Thank you so much, and may we all be inspired to have faith in the future because of one another. And now it's a privilege to call on Janie and Karen again, who are going to introduce our next segment.
Thank you, Wes. Next, we want you to enjoy listening to our wonderful women's choir's Mira, doing a lovely rendition of Osei Shalom.
Ose Shalom. We will now turn to our Sisterhood co-presidents, Lisa Drop.
That was beautiful, Zamira and Eugenia, thank you. Hello, I am Lisa Cohen with Robin Chabelle. We are Sisterhood Temple Emmanuel co-presidents. Welcome to our 85th annual Donor 2020. We are particularly proud to present Donor to you this year because when we started to conceptualize virtual Donor, we questioned what this event would possibly look like on a computer screen. If not for the vision and dedication of Karen Dresner and Janie Garshik, we would not be here today connecting while apart. Karen, Janie, thank you for all you have done to bring virtual Donor to life. We are beyond impressed how you have taken this social fundraising event, transferred it to a new platform, and streamed it into our homes, all without missing a beat. You have shown us how Sisterhood can continue to do important work while building community, even during the pandemic. We also want to thank our wonderful musical guests, our amazing donor committee, as well as the Temple Emmanuel staff and clergy team.
And we especially want to thank Dr. Rochelle Walensky. We are thrilled to have you here with us today. And we want to thank all of you at home for joining us. While we cannot be physically together at the temple this year, please know that the proceeds from today's event, along with other Sisterhood fundraising initiatives, support so many beloved programs that enrich our community, especially during these difficult times. Some of these programs include Family Table and Yad Chesed, college holiday packages, Tenachim for B'nai Mitzvah, Tuesday morning rabbi study, camp scholarships, Mayim Hayim, plus much more. So far, Donor has raised over $18,000. In a normal year, this wonderful event would have taken place at the Adelson Community Hall, but despite COVID, we still have more than 250 guests joining us to make Donor happen. It is so heartwarming to see everyone coming together today to support Sisterhood, Temple Emmanuel, and the Jewish community at large. This is truly the essence of Donor, and we feel so proud and honored to be a part of it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa and Robin. Thinking about what you just said, quite frankly, I had no idea what Donor would look like when I agreed to take this on with Karen, as I had never worked on the event before other than to help solicit sponsorships. But Karen was very committed to folding in as many traditions as possible. And in fact, one of them is the delightful singing of our children's choir. So I am so pleased to introduce the Temple Emmanuel Children's Choir, who will give a very special performance. The kids are just terrific, and we know how very hard they and their parents work to practice and record the individual performances. And then for Eugenia Gerstein, our choir director, to sync up their video clips. They'll be singing 2 songs for us this morning, The World is a Circle and Hine Matok.
And
applause. And a big thank you to the Children's Choir for their very sweet performance. I feel so privileged to have them participating in this donor as they've done in years past. Now I'd like to introduce Esther Lichtenstein, who is the North Atlantic Regional President of Women's League of Conservative Judaism. She's with us today on Zoom and also has sent her well wishes.
My name is Esther Lichtenstein, and I'm North Atlantic Region President of Women's League of Conservative Judaism. Today I bring greetings to the Temple Emmanuel Sisterhood, and I thank you for everything you do on behalf of Women's League and the conservative movement. I want to wish you a great success on your virtual donor dinner, which I know will be fabulous. And thank you so much for including me. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for the well wishes. And now I'm going to hand the podium over to Rabbi Robinson, who will introduce Dr. Walensky. Again, we will open up the chat line for you to type in your questions after Rochelle.
Hello. First of all, hello everyone. And Rochelle, in addition to your round-the-clock work as Chief of Infectious Diseases at Mass General Hospital and Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School, you are a leading member of the Governor's Advisory Board and regularly on CNN, New York Times, and other national and local media educating about COVID-19. In the midst of all of that, you always, and when I say always, I mean always, at any hour of any day, you make time to share your guidance and wisdom with us here at your home at Temple Emmanuel. From the very start of this pandemic, you have been our lodestar and our guide. They say that you can't be at two places at once, but today you are literally speaking to us from the hospital, engaged in the holy work of healing, while simultaneously doing this mitzvah of sharing your wisdom with our beloved community. And so on behalf of Sisterhood and our entire Temple Emmanuel community, I want to thank you and welcome you. We are so very grateful to you. Please, Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Robinson. You know, I love this event. And if you had told me last year when I was sitting at it that I would be the speaker this year, I would have never been able to understand the events that would lead to that. But here we are. So I want to say, first of all, that I'm honored, humbled, delighted to be with you. I want to thank Karen and Janie and Lisa and Robin for the invitation to be with you today. And I thought what I would do is just tell you my story and how I got here. You know, when people say, what's infectious disease, or at least they did a year ago, nobody really knew what we did, or many people didn't. And in fact, if you answered the pager in Whole Foods and said, this is infectious disease, we're turning a page, everybody scattered. Nobody really wanted any part of you. So what I will say is just give you a little view of my path. You know, I knew very early on I wanted to be a physician. I, at a young age, had a pediatrician who was a woman, and she was very formative in my time as a child, and showed me that it was possible for a woman to do this job. I was raised in a traditional Jewish household, and several things were really important and ingrained in me. One is family first. You always take care of your family and have to make sure that they're doing well. The second is you have to take care of others and be a good human and have your values really point due north. Then the third was to be an independent woman, and that I needed to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. After doing all of those things, I needed to be able to be independent and to aspire and reach for the stars. And so I would like to say that that's sort of how I launched going to college and then going to medical school. I was in medical school in Baltimore. And I remember 1991, and because 1991 was pretty formative for me. So 1991 was my first year of medical school at Johns Hopkins. And I walked into the classroom, this big lecture hall, and everyone was poured over the newspaper because Magic had just announced he had HIV. And everybody couldn't believe it. And around that same time, Arthur Ashe was diagnosed with HIV. Actually, he was diagnosed with AIDS and was suffering with AIDS. And I had the delight of being an Arthur Ashe Memorial Lecturer several years ago and got to read quite a bit about his autobiography, or his biography. So the reason Arthur Ashe is not with us and MAGIC is with us is because Arthur Ashe was diagnosed with AIDS late in his disease course, and MAGIC was diagnosed actually quite early in his disease course because the LA Lakers took out an insurance policy on him and tested him. So he had very early disease when he was diagnosed, and that's why he's still around. So I went through medical school. I remember that day. I went through medical school. That was 1991. There was no treatment for HIV. Fast forward to 1995 when I was a house officer at Hopkins. I had just gotten married. Lauren and I met in medical school. And inner city Baltimore in 1995 was a lot of injection drug use. That's what we saw. And many of those patients were dying of AIDS. So we would admit a lot of patients dying of AIDS for every night. And we didn't have a lot for them. Many of the gay men of that time were dying, had already died, but it was coming into the injection drug using population as well as into their female partners. So we were just starting to see women who were the female partners of injection drug users. And when you're a physician taking care of those people, you hear their stories and you recognize that they just got dealt a bum deck sometimes, and that whatever it is that they tried to do, there was not necessarily a way out of it for them. And our job was to take care of them. Our job was to try and do what we call harm reduction. How is it that you can prevent this? How is it you can prevent it from giving it to somebody else, even if you're addicted? And how can we best take care of you when you're sick? But we pronounced a lot of people dead that year of AIDS. And that was, you know, house officers go July to July. So it was July 1 of 1995. And what was so remarkable about that year is in December of 1995, about 6 months into it, the first antiretroviral cocktail was approved by the FDA. And so for the first time ever, we could tell people, we didn't know for sure, you might not die of this. And it was pretty incredible that people had the possibility even of hope, because other than that, they didn't. It was, this is how this goes. We don't have a lot to do for you. That was so formative for me, not only because of the people we were taking care of and what we could potentially offer them, the fact that I had a few clinic patients who quit using drugs, just a few, but that was enough to inspire me because those drugs are hard to quit, and that some of them were not going to die. So we had an intern class of about 30 when I was an intern, and 9 of us went into HIV/AIDS. It was such an incredible time. The science was incredible. The emotions were incredible. Taking care of people was really incredible. And so that was my intern year. And I decided at that point that the pathway to study HIV and was through to become an infectious disease doctor. And so that's what I did. And I went, continued taking care of those patients, and then moved up here in Boston to Boston with Lauren for fellowship in 1998, and started doing my infectious disease fellowship here. It is a lot of time on call, seeing people with fevers in the hospital, but ultimately I started to pursue a research career in mathematical modeling and simulation of HIV disease. And what that essentially means is how can, with very limited resources, we blanket as much health as possible out there when we have so few dollars. Many of you probably don't know there are about 1.2 million people living in the United States with HIV, and they cost about $45,000 a year in terms of their HIV meds right now to take care of them. So early on in my career, I spent a lot of time thinking about how we test for HIV, who we test for HIV. I conducted a randomized controlled trial. The answer is we should all be tested for HIV. I conducted a randomized controlled trial in the Brigham on HIV testing, and then used our mathematical models to demonstrate it was actually cost effective for everyone in the United States to be HIV tested. That was one of the first analyses that I did that changed the US guidelines, helped to change the US guidelines to promote more HIV screening screening, which I believe has done a world of good, actually. Now 1 in 5 people with HIV do not know that they have HIV. That's down from 1 in 3. My first trip to South Africa was in 2010. Clearly the HIV pandemic was getting worse in Africa while we certainly had disease, but much less of it. I was working with a fellow who was doing clinical studies in HIV, and she was just testing people who walked into urgent care centers in South Africa. You could come in for a broken ankle, for any sort of trauma. 1 in 2 had HIV in that study. And it was really extraordinary. So for the first time, I've been now 3 times. For the first time, I went to South Africa in 2010, visited our clinic, and I was again changed. We had a clinic with some colleagues there in a township in Massapumalele outside of Cape Town. And antiretrovirals were first starting to get to those sites. And what you could see is people who were wasted and dying would get their ARVs and actually live and survive, and actually then work in the clinic to try and give them to others. So it was really motivating. I've done a lot of work now in cost effectiveness in other countries, working with UNAIDS and the WHO, in South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Cote d'Ivoire. And for the first time, I was really thrilled to bring the family back to South Africa to meet my colleagues there in 2018. So while we saw a whole bunch of animals, and that's always fun, it really is inspiring for me to go back and to see some of our PEPFAR sites and to see what has the antiretrovirals that we've been able to deliver in those sites, both to pregnant women as well as to people living with HIV. So in 2017, the chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases stepped down after a 30-year career as our chief at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I threw my name in the ring, and was appointed as the 3rd chief ever of Massachusetts General Hospital. The prior 2 chiefs had 35 and 30-year tenures, so we'll see where I am in 25 years. But I have to admit, I knew I was inheriting an incredible division because the field of infectious diseases is generally one that gives to the vulnerable and treats those who have infectious diseases in general affect more vulnerable communities. I just have an incredible group of people with that I get to work with. And what I really wanted to do was mentor more people and help train the next generation and of infectious disease physicians. And then, and I obviously had no idea what I was stepping into at the time. So that was 2017. And I have to say, like, the next couple of minutes, I just want to talk about hard decisions. So before I stepped into this position, I read a whole bunch of things about how to be a good leader. And one of the things that stuck with me is sometimes you won't make the right decision, but you just need to make a decision. And so I have frequently thought of that because each time I'm not sure I'm going to be right, but I really do try and make a decision. So in the middle of February, the head of the microbiology lab at Mass General, friend and colleague Eric Rosenberg, called me and said, we need to have a meeting about whether we're going to create a test for this. There were a lot of cases starting to crop up in New York and in Washington, and obviously China was in a bad way at that point, and we didn't know how much testing we were going to have. And the trade-off was we wouldn't be able to do standard testing that we do for the hospital if we were going to put all resources towards doing a test. We made the hard decision to go ahead and pursue that, and that was largely Eric's decision, and it was among the wisest things that I think he has done, is to pursue a test, because we were one of the first institutions to have a test and be able to start screening when the state we would be triaging people to the state. There were 12 tests for the entire state. And then was February break. I think that was kind of the last time I remember being human the way we know it, or sane. And then came February break, and then I returned, and it was March 6th. And I remember the day because our biggest HIV conference in the United States is called CROI, the Conferences on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections. And for as luck would have it, this year it was in Boston. I knew the secretariat of the conference, and they were hanging the signs at CROI, Heinz, and they were unpacking the backpacks. And they said, and then I got a call that there were numerous cases of COVID in the state due to Biogen, and that we didn't have enough tests to contain them, and it probably was not a good idea to have 5,000 people from all over the world appear at Heinz. And so that was probably the first hard decision that I made, which was to call the executive secretary of the meeting and say, you should really turn this off and shut it down. Yeah, I'm sure it was not my call alone. There were numerous other calls, but that is what happened. And then my next phone call was to Rabbi Robinson and said, I have no idea how this is going to go, but I do know that elderly people don't do well. And you have a lot of elderly people that are congregating, and I don't think that's a good idea. I was met with every bit of enthusiasm as I could have imagined. That is not necessarily what anybody wanted to hear. I also called the mayor and said, I think things are going to be bad. And we had no idea, and it could have easily been the wrong call, but I felt like people needed to know. So, you know, what I've had to do over the last many months now is to sort of make some of the hard calls in collaboration with a lot of people. The Division of Infectious Diseases at Massachusetts General Hospital is about 50 physicians. I want to, and everybody has been incredible. Turns out there are a lot of infectious disease physicians in the Temple Emmanuel community. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention Camille Cotton, Howard Heller, Mark Poznansky, who have all been at my side through every bit of this. We have all really, you know, it's incredible when you pick up the phone and say, I need help, and people say, how? What do you need? You know, through the March and April surge, we had over 360 patients at Mass General with COVID, over 170 intubated in the ICU at some periods of time, and it was all hands on deck. So, you know, I would like to say things have kind of slowed down, and they're slower in the hospital, although and I just got called to see a patient with COVID. So, you know, they are slower in the hospital in terms of our numbers, but what hasn't slowed down is the need for more public response. How are we going to do vaccine trials here at Mass General? How are we going to do outreach to our vulnerable communities? How are we going to get drug to the right people when we only have a limited supply? How is it that we're going to do outpatient trials? How can we help our communities? How can we help our schools? How can we help the state? So not a lot has actually slowed down in the world of infectious disease, even when we were not in the middle of the surge and planning for the new surge that we're anticipating here. I've done my best to use my voice and my science to influence policy. We've written some work on how to open colleges safely, and how we might use tests in order to do so. How to get remdesivir. We've had some limited supply of remdesivir, which has been a real challenge. And in fact, coming soon is how we're going to get monoclonal antibodies to the right people. I never thought this would land me in the media, I will just say. And one of the things that happened is I do know Tony Fauci. I know Debbie Birx a little less well, but we were starting to hear loud and clear that Tony was not being able to use his voice as loudly as he wanted to speak science. And so there was a bit of a calling from several of us to sort of say, please use your voice so you can speak science where he cannot. And so when people started calling, that's what I did. I just tried not to say no to just speaking science to the public and kind of saying it in English. So when the media calls, I will try and come. I will try and just speak the science that I know how to speak. I just want to conclude some remarks with some thank yous. I don't know how I would have done this without my family. You know, with all I've mentioned in the last 20 years, my trips to South Africa, the last 10 months, as you can imagine, you know, my family has had to really be there for me. Lauren is my rock, my best friend. He's encouraged me to reach all the way. He believes in me when sometimes I don't believe in myself. And despite his own extraordinary responsibilities in taking care of pediatric patients with cancer and doing drug development, he has been there and told me to lean in and never said no to something that he thought I needed to do. Of course, my 3 sons, Seth, Matthew, and Josh, who are my biggest fans, and who will always sit down and watch with me the CNN tape that I just had and say, that was great, your hair was out of place or not. And quite honestly, like so many of our children, their teenage and college years are just unrecognizable. And so they've been incredibly patient with me and with their current state, because they have truly lost so much. My parents, who pick up the phone at any hour and will actually kind of drop everything because they know that that's the hour that I have to speak with them. Carol Walpoff, Ed and Marilyn Bursoff have really just been incredible supports for me through this, and they always say, "Are you tired?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a little tired." Take care of yourself. Yes, I'm trying to, and my family's been wonderful in doing that. And then of course to the Temple Emmanuel community, really, there are times that I come home and challah is delivered on Friday night at my house. There have been times where ordered meat from the butchery has just shown up. So many of you have sent love and support, emails and texts, and of course to the clergy, Rabbi Robinson, Rabbi Gordon Schwartz, Rabbi Berger, all of you have instilled these Jewish values and Jewish education in my family, have, taught my children the value of tefillot and mitzvot and tzedakah, and that's just been incredible for us to have a spiritual home to come to, especially during these times, for sure. And then I just want to thank, again, Karen and Janie for putting together such a beautiful program, and to Lisa and Robin for the invitation to be here. Thank you so much.
Wow, Rochelle, thank you so much for those amazing words. I want to open up this question period by, first of all, inviting people to submit questions through the chat feature to the questions host. Please submit your questions and I'll do my best to synthesize them and pass it along. And in the meantime, Rochelle, I have an open question. You spoke about those hard calls that you make, and you have been really using your voice. You've been vocal in the media and advising the government response to COVID-19. And so I want to ask you, here you are. What would be on your wish list for a COVID response, for a coronavirus community response that would help you to do the work that you're trying to do?
Thank you. I think we all need to be patient. One thing that I kind of want to convey, and Massachusetts is doing this well, although not 100%. One thing that is just not popular, my parents have told me that all of their friends dislike me, is that this is going to be a long haul. Everyone is saying, and I think there's some voices that are responsible for this, we just need the vaccine. And as soon as we have the vaccine, we can all get back to normal. And I just want to kind of set the stage that the vaccine will be, we may have a vaccine, but having a vaccine and having protection are two different things. And, vaccine doesn't save lives, vaccination saves lives. And so, I do think that we're going to be wearing masks for another year or two at least. I do think that as we roll out, the vaccines that are coming are not easy to store, they're not easy to use, they're not easy to deploy. So it's going to take some time for all of us to be vaccinated and to be protected. So the real thing I want to sort of convey is be smart, be patient, wear a mask. Please protect yourself over the holidays, because that is going to be hard. This Thanksgiving will not be the one that Norman Rockwell painted. It's just going to be hard. The data from the state suggests that most of the clusters that they can identify are now happening in households. And so that means those people who you know and love, it's not because they're not trying to do the right thing, it's just because this virus can spread asymptomatically. So I would just say be careful and hold out for 2021 to make sure that everybody's around the table together in 2021.
That's so painful to hear. And we're all so anxious for that miracle that comes by. I'm listening to you earlier in your speech, the joy on your face when you spoke about the ability to have a medication that could cure, that could be curative for those who were living with AIDS and HIV was just absolutely extraordinary. I mean, you were glowing here. The idea that you finally had something that could help people. So I have a question from Yael Miller. When will we finally have a vaccine program in place that will actually be able to do for us what those medications are able to do for those living with HIV and AIDS?
So without a crystal ball, I'll tell you what we know so far. So there are about 5 vaccine candidates in clinical trials. 2 of them have fully enrolled. So that's great. And we're waiting for endpoints, meaning cases of disease, for them to sort of demonstrate that, and we're waiting for some safety data. Projections suggest we'll get some of those by around the end of December to demonstrate whether there was efficacy and whether it was safe. So that will say, yes, there may be a vaccine, but I want to sort of give some caveats to that. The first 20 million doses are projected to go to healthcare workers. And I want to be very clear that we are advocating as we look at distributing that it's not necessarily even the physicians and nurses and frontline workers. We're talking about anybody in healthcare, the staff, the environmental services, the cafeteria workers, everyone. The tricky bit with the 2 vaccines that are the longest, furthest along, the front runners essentially, are 2 big things. One is they need to be frozen at -80, and they need to maintain that through the entire supply chain of distribution. If they're thawed for longer than 6 hours, they have to be discarded. That cold chain is extraordinarily hard in terms of its distribution, whether we have enough dry ice, whether we have enough glass that can be frozen that cold. So many things are really hard through that. The second is that everyone needs 2 doses for it to work. So not only do you need to be able to give it once, but you need to be able to give it twice. And the distribution of that outside of a medical setting to 330 million people is a lot. And then maybe finally, I will just say the efficacy benchmarks that they're looking at is 50% efficacy. So even if you get it, you're not going to be sure if you're going to be the one who got protection or not. And that's really where I say we really need to be patient.
And on that note, somebody here in the chat asked, she's heard in previous conversations with doctors that if a vaccine were released now or within the next few months, sort of a rushed vaccine, that many of the doctors would not take it themselves. Has that shifted or changed?
I think it depends on how it's released. I think if it goes through the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, on which Camille Cotton sits, I think if it is run through the Data Safety Monitoring Board of the vaccine trials, if it's done through the proper mechanisms, at the FDA where the data are released, we are allowed to look at them. Tony Fauci's seen them, the FDA advisory committees have seen them. I think then many of us would say, yes, we're good to go. So I think if it's run through the general processes, the challenge has been that the FDA has bypassed some of those over the last couple of months. And so I'm just skeptical that they will continue through the processes. Although I will say the FDA has since said that they will not do anything to short those processes. And in fact, if anything, there was going to be a requirement of 2 months of safety data. They're now moved that to 3 months of safety data, which many of us advocated for. So I think if it's run through the regular processes, I would be, among those who would step forward.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about Thanksgiving. We're getting a number of questions about Thanksgiving, about how do I gather with my family safely? If I'm outdoor freezing with a jacket, shivering underneath the heat lamps, is that okay? Talk to us about outdoor versus indoor. Talk to us about the ways in which we are seeing restrictions around the country and of course over in England. What do we need to be doing? What's the right thing for a sisterhood member to do with her or perhaps his family at this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I think that we all need to understand, just in terms of like, I've gotten so many emails saying, can you advise the governor to shut down? Like, the numbers are on the rise in Massachusetts. We don't want the numbers to be on the rise in Massachusetts. Can we advise the governor to shut down? So on Thursday, the state released data as to where the cases are coming from. And only about 50% of cases can they track, but thousands are coming from households. And the next largest distribution of cases was 141 in long-term care facilities. So there's like 3,800 clusters that they're investigating in households, and just handfuls in other places. So the real question is, if you were to shut down the economy, if you were to shut things down, would that drive more people to the households because they have no place else to gather, when in fact that's actually the biggest problem also. And it's not entirely clear that closing more restaurants, closing more gyms or other places where there's really just a handful here and there is going to fix anything. And everybody is worried about the economy. So that brings me to the households, right? That's where they're happening. They've defined these clusters as 2 people in a single household where they know both were infected and they presume that the contact was one another. And then it really becomes the question of how are we going to gather safely? We're going to be a nuclear family potted for Thanksgiving. It pains me to say. I wanted to see my parents. I was trying to figure out the best way to make that happen, and it's not going to be able to happen. I'm very worried about kids coming home from the holidays for Thanksgiving from colleges. I very much worry that kids who are coming from places that haven't been doing ample screening, those kids, if possible, should really quarantine at home before they head to the dinner table, or try and quarantine at school before they come home. Can you eat outside? Can you gather outside? Can you go for walks outside? I think that that's okay. Do I think it's a good idea to have, the kids on one end of the table and the grandparents on the other end of the table with the windows open? I just don't. And this, again, it is not about love and trust. It's about the fact that the kids tend to do better than the older folks. They tend to have less symptomatic disease, and some of them are in school, right? So we just don't know how much that school exposure, might be an issue. It may not be an issue at all, but we don't know. And when you have older people at that same table, which is what we all want, right? That's the reason to do it. Then I worry about the risk.
So we have another question here from Roberta Laredo. So does that mean no flights? How do you feel about air travel right now, going home for Thanksgiving?
Yeah, so turns out when you're on an airplane, there's a lot of exchanges of air. So there's a lot of air exchange on a given airplane. There have been numerous outbreaks on planes. They are often on very long flights. There was just one to Ireland, I believe, a 7-hour flight. There was another one to Singapore, I believe, from Italy to Singapore. So they tend to be on long flights. They tend to be tracked to when people are not wearing masks on the airplane. So, and I will tell you that I have been on an airplane since I was on an airplane over the summer. So I think it's possible, but I would probably keep it to relatively short flights. I will also say that one of the challenges with the flights is the airport. So a lot of people travel and they come from a lot of places, and many of those places have a lot of disease. So I wouldn't necessarily go on crowded planes. I would talk to the airline industry and see how they're handling what they're doing, and if they have sort of talked to people who've flown that. We flew JetBlue, for example, and they were terrific. But I've seen other people who, and I'm not an advocate, I mean, like, I don't care what you fly, but what I will say is, some of them are doing it better than others. And so I would just sort of check in with what they're doing, and then just be careful in the airport support, and try and not fly like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving when things are just going to be more crowded.
So pushing a little bit more on this family gathering piece, we have a question here about, well, wait a minute, if I can eat outdoors at a restaurant, why can't I gather with my family outdoors on the table at their home? And to that, I want to add, you spoke beautifully, Rochelle, about family first. And you are really a huge role model of that because you put your boys, Seth and Matthew and Josh, first, always. So I want to add to this question, how are you managing with them during the pandemic? What choices are you making for them? And what are your hopes and your fears? So first, family in the large piece, how do I put my family first? And second, what are you doing to put your family first?
Right. So in terms of the outdoor dining, we'll have to see what Thanksgiving Day looks like, but if it looks like October 31st or November 1st, that's going to be a hard meal to serve outside, right? It's just cold. So if you're talking about long tables, people outside, a buffet outside, I think that's doable. I don't know whether that's easy in Boston. If you're flying to, the South where it might be warmer, that may very well be doable. And I think that that's probably okay. My preference would be if you're going to take your mask off and eat, that you're kind of far apart when you do so. But if you're sort of mingling outside, I think that that's okay. Many of these clusters have happened in places where everybody's mask is down because they're eating. We just can track a lot of it because people are eating. And my kids have been amazing. I mean, so much has been taken from them. So much, they're grateful. We know that we haven't been immediately impacted by sickness and death from this. So I think that we recognize that. We think about that all the time, and that the things that they have lost are small compared to those things. Seth is doing college from afar. He has missed, much of his sophomore year and half of his junior year now, at least being on campus. And he is with 4 friends in kind of a lake house where they're not seeing much or seeing many people. It's really just the 4 of them. Matthew's abroad. Matthew's in Switzerland, and things have just tightened down there. He was able to go. We've not been able to visit him, but we're FaceTiming him often. And he is, going to class. He was going to class there wearing a mask. Switzerland has gotten a little bit more cases, so they are now going remote in Switzerland, but he is still in Lugano. And Josh is doing high school from 811 Com Ave. And, he's trying to find the good things. And what I will say is he and his friends, I think, have been pretty good about knowing how to keep safe. They've been out a lot, but outside. So they do spend some time outside. He spent a lot of time over the summer just getting up at 5 in the morning with some friends and watching the sunrise and stargazing. So they've spent some time doing those sorts of things. He's spent a lot of time practicing piano. So we've gotten some really good piano time out of it, which has been really nice for us to appreciate and hear and just enjoy the music. It's been hard for them. It's been hard for them. I will say Matthew, for his high school graduation, put on his cap and gown, came to the in front of the TV so we could hit play for the graduation. And he said, "This is everything I dreamt it would be."
Oh, well, speaking of how hard it is, we're talking about how hard it is for all of us. And we have a question here about mental health versus physical health. Do you have any medical advice for us on how we balance mental health with our physical health?
Hard. It's hard. And I think all of us are feeling that stress, and it's going to get harder over the winter. So the one thing I would say is, well, several things. One is stay connected to people. Try and stay connected, try and stay active, try and get outside, get up and shower every day. Try and kind of keep those pieces of routine. reach into the fact that Zoom now allows us to connect with people in a much easier way. So a lot of people are rekindling prior friendships. I know Lauren has a call this afternoon with some members from an old camp from high school. So like really try and connect with people, because I think that that's what keeps us going. And, you know, then I would say reach out when you know you need help. Because there are a lot of people who really do need help, and please don't be afraid to ask, because there's support there. We are doing our best to give people the help that they need, but please reach out for help if you need it.
Thank you, Rochelle. So last question. This can all feel so overwhelming. The Boston Globe ran a map late last week with Massachusetts running from week to week with color coded, and you're seeing communities go from gray to green to yellow to red, and they're sort of closing in, and you see the same on a national scale. We just had an incredible chart published in the New York Times. England's going into a second lockdown. New York State has just put Massachusetts on the list of places that you can't go without quarantining. So what can an individual do with all of that information? What should our behavioral response be? And if you had a last word to tell all of us here about what we should do in light of what we're seeing, what would it be?
Wear a mask, stay distant, have some stamina in this, and try and stick in your pods. The problem is, it's just people who you love may unwittingly bring it home, and wittingly bring it home. And so it has nothing to do with love. It has nothing to do with trust. It's, you know, how many people other people are mixing with, whether it be in school or, you know, in a restaurant or in a gym or at a chorus. If we put our head, I really do believe that if we put our head down and get things under control and are really pretty strict now, we will have more quickly the ability to be more lenient. But if we have this continuous smolder, we could be doing this for a long time.
So which brings me to my last question, which is, we always ensure we have a haftarah, we have a note of hope. Do you have a haftarah note of hope at this time to leave us with?
There have been so many silver linings to this. I mean, it's just been an awful 9 months, but the connection that we've had with people, the way people have just been incredible in terms of stepping up and looking out for one another and giving to one another and protecting one another. I do hope that the events of the last 9 months will finally teach us how to better protect our vulnerable communities. I think that we will not get out of this pandemic if we don't treat and take care of our most vulnerable communities. And so maybe we can spend some due time and attention to making sure that they get the care that they need.
Rochelle, thank you. Amen. It sounds like we've all got a lot of work to do. We're super grateful to you for your amazing words today and for your incredible leadership every day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Rochelle, thank you so much for your insightful and informative talk today. We really appreciated your participation in the event and fitting us into your very busy on-call schedule. It was really fascinating to hear about your background and how you came to do what you're doing today, and certainly about the current whirlwind of the past several months. And we're very appreciative of the practical pieces of wisdom and advice you provided us all throughout today to deal with this very challenging time. On behalf of Sisterhood, we are delighted to present you with a contribution to the Mass General Hospital, which will support the efforts of the Division of Infectious Diseases under your leadership as chief.
Thank you so very much.
And now, we are very fortunate to have a live performance by our very talented clergy coming to you directly from our sanctuary.
We are a pleasure to be with all of you. We are going to start with a couple of songs for peace, Ose Shalom and Salam. And all of you at home, please join us, because this is what we need and this is our hope. Oh, Jose, Shalom, Mimeromba. Oh, yeah, Jose, Shalom, Aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Ve'imru. Shalom Bimrama, Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, Ve'imru. Our next song is going to be Kol Haolam Kulo. Gesher, the world is a narrow bridge, but the most important thing is not to be afraid. Jeremiah is going to join us in percussion.
Kol haolam kulo, gesher tzar me'od, v'aikar lo לפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, והעיקר לא לפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, והעיקר to be afraid. לא לפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, like not to be afraid.
To my left, to my right, the jaws of Biamis, my strengthening teeth, I judge my course. Ringing in my ears, to my left and to my right, the jaws of Biamis, my strengthening teeth, I judge my course. Ringing in my ears.
How can I be safe on a narrow bridge? How can I be strong till the day I die? How can I be safe on a narrow bridge? How can I be strong till the day I die? Look down,
Keep going,
don't look down,
keep going,
don't look down, keep moving. Don't look down, keep going, don't look down, keep going, don't look down, keep moving. Don't look down,
keep going,
don't look down,
keep going,
don't look down, keep moving. Don't look down, keep going, don't look down, keep going, don't look down, keep moving. All how love
to the right.
get
Just at the abyss, my strength indeed, I touch my core. Fear thinking in my ears, to my right. Just at the abyss, my strength indeed, I touch my core. Fear thinking in my ears, העולם כולו.
How true it is. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the key is to find our inspiration, our strength in each other, so that we will not be afraid.
הנני בצלם אלוהים.
הנני בצלם אלוהים, מקווים, מקווים, נשמתי תהולהי. הנני בצלם אלוהים, מקווים, מקווים, נשמתי תהולהי. ברוך הנני בצלם אלוהים, מקווים, מקווים, נשמתי טהורה.
We're now going to focus all of our energy on sending out blessings for loving kindness, blessings for connection, empowering us all to build the world of kindness and love that we've dreamed of.
Amen.
We want to thank our dear friend Jeremiah Klarman for coming here and all of my colleagues, clergy. We are going to finish with this beautiful song that we sing during the contemporary service, during the Rosh Hashanah service, called Bashana Aba'ah, for a year, for next year, with hope, with happiness, and hoping to have our lives back. Alisa?
Thank you.
Shana הבאה נשב על המרפסת ונזכור סיפורים נודדות. ילדים בחופשה, תשחקו תופסת בין הבית לבין השדות. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. Soon the day will arrive when we will live together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day dark new clouds will appear. We don't see what a world that can be when we share and we can, you and me. Wait and see what a world it can be if we share, if we can, you and me. Some have dreams, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and their visions were made in our lives. Now the torch must be passed, in hope and not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start. בשנה הבאה. Wait and see what a world it can be if we share, if we can, you
בשנה הבאה.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elias, Dean, Elisa, and Michelle for the lovely and uplifting performance. We really feel so fortunate to have such amazing talent at the Town Hall. On behalf of Sisterhood, Karen and I hope that you enjoyed today's donor and be inspired by our speaker and musical performances. As I noted, as we were planning, we tried to honor the traditions of an in-person event, converting the program to online where we could, and embracing our theme, connecting while apart, our virtual gathering.
We are delighted that you all Zoomed with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in other virtual events throughout the year until we can all be in person together. Thank you again for coming.